This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe the highly experienced, down-to-earth, visionary, and pragmatic innovation expert. Through her diverse experiences, she has created and pressure-tested the Seek, Seed, and Scale framework. She's the author of the Change Makers Playbook. This is Amy Radin. Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Amy, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron movement. We're thrilled to have you here today. We know that you are one of the leading experts in the field of innovation, and I think all of our tribe members have pen and paper ready to go to take some serious notes, because we're going to dive right in to what makes you see the world the way that you do. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jim. It's really great to be here.
You know, it's really interesting when we started talking and I really started to think about the word innovation. It's thrown around quite a bit, right? That's an innovative idea, or, we truly are embracing innovation. But I'd love to know your opinion on the word and the definition from your point of view, because I think it's sloppy sometimes. I think people just use it and it's lazy for what they say. I'd love to know your opinion on it.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you. In fact, I like to say if there are 10 people in a room, you'll probably get 12 definitions. So it's great to start out just laying out, the definition of innovation that I like to use and that hopefully our whole conversation will be based upon. So
Great.
I think about innovation as creating viable new ways to solve the real problems that real people have. So viable, it can be, they can be done, they're feasible, and they can be ultimately done with a good business model. And they are solving real problems of real people. So a lot of times innovation gets confused with, cool stuff. People think it's technology, people think it's stuff that can't be measured, that it's long term, and I don't ascribe to any of those beliefs. I think it's very real and it's very essential to any business or other entity that wants to be around.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was taking some notes to get ready to talk with you today, I'm a big believer in human-centric leading and all of those kind of core competencies that go around that. And when I was just contemplating the word innovation and I was going to talk to you about some of the questions I was teeing up, I kind of got into the idea of growth versus fixed mindset. When we talk from human development, are you in the growth mindset or are you a fixed leader? Can that be placed in terms of basically from the organization also on when you use the term innovation? Do you find if the organization is stuck in that fixed mindset kind of thing and you try to unstick them from that? Is it the same kind of analogy?
Yeah, I think that you're raising a really good point. I think innovation, it can be very polarizing. Nobody will say no one will say they're against innovation, right? But when you get in, but organizations all have cultures, and if it's a culture where people are stuck for whatever reason, it could be a business that's always been highly successful, and so people don't see the need to change. Or it could be a business or organization that doesn't accept failure, and innovation requires failure. If you're not failing some of the time on your innovation experiments, you have to ask yourself if you're innovating. Um, Innovation demands intellectual curiosity, and if you're not part of a curious culture, it's very hard for innovation to thrive. So yeah, I think mindset is something that, I think to be successful as an innovator, you definitely have to have a growth or a change-oriented mindset. You're curious about what's next and how do I get there. Um, but you also have to be in an organization setting, whether that's a tiny team with a couple of people trying to start something or a massive organization. You've got to be in an organization that values those characteristics.
So you talked about being able to embrace failure. So if you're talking from like a leadership competency point of view, when you're talking about so if you come in and you're like, hey, I'm the innovator and you've hired me, I'm going to come in here, or we now have a chief innovator, or we've contracted out to be innovative. Again, the sloppy definition of that. Does the leadership team have to have those type of leadership competencies that you just kind of mentioned, like the willingness to fail, curiosity, right culture, all of those kind of things? Do you find it's the DNA of the people on the executive team that truly counts so that you can be successful in an innovative change?
Yeah, it's really, really important. I mean, I say, I've worked in some very large organizations, right? I led an 800-person team at City, certainly a giant organization. And
Yeah.
people would sometimes my team were like it was like the little engine that could, right? Trying to get things to happen and drive change because we were leading the digital transformation of the credit card business, which was by itself, a fortune company. Forget about the rest of the corporation. And we had this little innovation skunk works. And, a lot of times we faced our challenges internally. And people, sometimes would complain about the culture. And I would say, listen, the culture is us. The culture is the sum of the thousands of choices we all make every day. But culture is set, the tone for culture is set from the top of the house. At the same time, it's everybody's responsibility, I think, to contribute to the culture. Now, I would say that if you're in a corporate culture and you're the person who's been tagged with, the innovation mantle, it's vital to have sponsorship from the C-level of the organization uh, to in order to do your job. And I was very fortunate that I had that sponsorship. But I have to say, the first time my CEO came to me and said, I want you to do something about innovation because we're not innovative and we need to be innovative. And that was literally how I fell into this journey. Um, you don't say no to the CEO. Yeah, I think you're suicidal if you do that. But I left his office sort of scratching my head and saying, okay, he either thinks I'm really special or I've drawn the short straw. And I just got to have a passion for this kind of work because it's very gratifying when you achieve results. There's nothing like it, but it's hard work, and it comes down to the details of everyday execution and influence and relationship building. You're rolling the boulder up the hill sometimes, and it's you've got to really be passionate and have a strong vision of what you're trying to achieve and what you stand for.
How did he see that in you? So if you weren't sitting in the position before, he's watching you, obviously, seeing your behaviors that you just described, and was like, okay, Amy's the one. Go innovate, whatever that means. What got you to that point? How do you think that you started to have this developmental mindset to think in those terms?
I mean, I have to say, I'm no psychologist. I had never taken a single psych course, but I have always been interested in leadership development and my own leadership development. For me, it probably goes back to my childhood. I'm in the middle of five children, um, all overachievers. So very, dinner time at our house was always a very,
It
very
was its own
rambunctious,
skunk works going on, huh?
very rambunctious, competitive group. But went to an experimental high school, a New York City public high school that was an experimental sort of open classroom environment. And so for some reason, I think I always gravitated and was interested in what's different. I wasn't the kind of person who ever wanted to kind of hoe the row in a narrow
Yep.
way. And my first big innovation role was to lead this digital transformation of the cards business. And I guess it's my nature. I prefer to look at what's coming than look behind me. It's just how I am. And years ago, one of my division presidents at American Express said to me, he told me that I was really, really good at connecting the dots. And I think it has something to do with that also, that I tend to look at all the different pieces of the puzzle around me, the trends, customer feedback, what's happening with business results, what's happening out in the market, what's happening with employees. And I just, my natural instinct is to say, well, what's this puzzle looking like now, and what opportunities come of that? So it's very natural connection between, I think, how I'm wired and where my own preferences are.
Have you, in your corporate career progression, have you always found yourself being attracted to and employed by companies that had that type of mindset, or were you ever trapped? Were you ever trapped in a place that didn't think those ways or encourage those ways?
Well, the ironic thing is that for somebody, I left corporate America 6 years ago, and since then, I started a whole new career. As you know, I've written my book, which we'll talk about, but also I've been doing advisory work mostly with early stage startups, and I serve on a board. But for the entirety of my corporate career, which was over 2 decades, I was almost always in consumer financial services, which, as you know, highly regulated. It's
Yeah.
all about, they're mostly lending businesses, all about managing risk.
Yep.
That's the overlay on the
Exactly.
business. So sometimes I scratch my head and I go like, what was I thinking? On the other hand, the skills that I learned and the experiences I've had really, in a funny way, enabled this second career. So I think I probably was looking for, I like the stability, although I don't think you can say anything stable anymore, but
Right.
the perceived stability of a corporate, being in a corporate structure. And there is the advantage of, they're incredibly bright people. There are resources. There's ways to get stuff done. There's sometimes structure is good. Um,
Yeah.
I was attracted to that, but because of the nature of the businesses I worked in, risk management was such an important factor of running a healthy business and being compliant with the many regulatory requirements that I guess I've always pushed against the status quo,
Uh,
because you always want to do something different. That's what innovators do. They do new things. And so, by definition, you're challenging norms. And there's always a lot of questions around, well, what's going to happen? And what if things go wrong? And why spend money on that when we know we can do this other thing that's a sure bet? And so, it's natural that you've got to be good at, you need the sponsorship, and you've got to develop skills and surround yourself with people who can influence and find ways to sort of navigate, to make change happen in a way that you have enough support from the organization to let new ideas sort of get nurtured and come to life.
Yeah, and I love that journey that you just took us on too, because it does show that even in a highly regulated type of industry that you are in, that you were allowed to start to think of those things, and it helped shape you. That education, that experience, all those things shaped you to where you get today, so that hopefully you can continue to break the status quo from so many organizations that feel that they've already arrived,
Yeah.
when, as we know,
Corporations,
it doesn't exist.
corporations are made up of people. Right. And so it's affiliating with the right people in a culture where change can happen. Don't forget, Citi is one example. Citi, a lot of your listeners may not remember this or have known this, but Citi was the bank that told people that you didn't need a teller to go to the bank.
Ha,
They pioneered in the 70s.
that's crazy talk.
They pioneered the installation of ATMs in lobbies and really took the branch out of the branch into the lobby. And so there was an innovation DNA that lives within the culture, and that coexisted with this tough regulatory environment, but it came from the top of the house down.
Yep. And you do see, like, before we start to get into the book itself, do you see, we're kind of, we're in the fourth industrial revolution now, huge sea change, even out of COVID, about how the world will work in the future. Do you see there's a need when you say, hey, it's brought from the top down? Are there competencies today that are required out of senior leaders that, quite frankly, they weren't thinking about even 5 years ago?
For sure. I mean, the competencies should have been on the radar of leaders 5 years ago. But I think what's happened out of COVID, and I think this is becoming obvious to more and more leaders, is a lot of changes that were underway and people may have been deferring in their, investment priorities have now been accelerated and forced to the top of the list. So, consumers have really accelerated their own digital transformation
Ha.
COVID because for months, I'm in the New York area. We had a very long lockdown,
Right.
right? And people are pretty nervous here because we were hit very badly by the spike in April, which I'm sure you know. And so, at least in this, people have really changed behavior and are becoming much more accustomed to shopping online, banking online, conducting all kinds of transactions and social activities remotely. I mean, even my 90-year-old mom is now gaming online, and she she wouldn't, she wouldn't touch an iPad until 5 weeks ago, and now she tells me, like, Amy, I can't stop. These games are addictive. It's like very.
Oh my goodness.
She's a funny barometer. So I think you have got to be. So just getting back to your question, you've got to be, you know, you've got to be intensely good at listening to your customers and understanding how their needs and behaviors and expectations are changing. So I think
for
that's
sure.
one. So the days of getting the neat little PowerPoint research study and the NPS score to tell you what your customers are thinking, you've got to get much more, you know, out there with your customers, understanding what they need and how they're feeling. So I think that's number one, much more closely connected to your customers in a real way. Get out from behind the PowerPoints. Um, Number two, much more focused, not just on their rational needs, but on emotional needs. This is a very emotional time. And I think when we're sitting in our beautiful C-suite boardrooms and everything's beautiful, it's very easy to forget about, we're all motivated by emotional needs, not, we're doing something for our family, or there's some personal development need that we have, or some reason that we do things that's not just rational. And so I think leaders have to be much more empathetic.
Wow.
I think that's empathetic to their employees and empathetic to their customers. And I think even if you're in a highly regulated industry, you can't hide behind the regulation and blame the regulators for your woes. You've got to come out from behind that stuff and reconcile the polarity of, yes, I have to operate a stable, sustainable, trusted business, and I need to experiment and evolve and have a dynamic business that's going to always be moving towards the future.
Without a doubt.
And so I think those are some of the qualities that I think leaders have to have if they're going to have vibrant businesses, because things are going to continue to change.
The imperative to innovate. No doubt about it. But if there was only someone who produced a book or something that had a methodology that could help us get along that way, that would be fantastic for this listening audience. So,
Right.
so I just happen to know that you've written something recently, and I want to know, without saying the name yet, because of course, we did read it in your bio read in, but um, the purpose of the name of the current book that you just wrote, how purposeful was that, and how much time did you take to make the title of your book?
Right. So first of all, that was a very gracious segue to talk about the book. So I have to thank you for that, Jim. It was very purposeful, and the funny thing is, going back to where our conversation started, I worked really hard to try to not have the word innovation in the title of the book
Bam!
because
Wow,
it's
got
so
it.
fraught. And then I was able, so getting it into the subtitle was great. But this idea of calling the book the Changemaker's Playbook, I love the idea of a playbook because the book is full of plays. I interviewed about 50 corporate innovators, founders, and investors. Because, by the way, their problems are not so dissimilar, and I think they can all learn from each other. So I deliberately did not want to go down one path or the other. And
Okay,
I wanted to write a book that people would keep on their physical or virtual shelf, and it would be dog eared. They'd want to pull it down
love
and
it.
look at different sections and look for ideas and advice because I don't come from an academic or consulting background. I was an innovation operator in the trenches in an incredibly demanding, results oriented business, having to make stuff happen that could benefit all of our stakeholders. And so I wanted to share the plays. And then the idea of a change maker, I said, I want to talk to I saw these people as my tribe. These are my people.
Love
People
it.
like me. Thank you. People like me who really want to do this work and who understand how hard it is and who are seeking advice and insights and tips. But they are people who are making change happen in a constructive way. And so that's where the main title came from. And then the subtitle, how to seek, seed, and scale innovation in any company. I do think the lessons apply to any kind of organization. And seeking, seeding, and scaling came about from as I was working on the book. I was really sort of downloading, 2.5 decades of my own experiences plus these other people into a book. And then you're going into this two-dimensional format where you can't have a dialogue and you say, well, how do you organize and structure this so that it's very easy for people to use as a playbook? And so that's where the methodology came from, is an organizing principle that would take something very dynamic and complicated and iterative and have it work in the 2x2 format, that the two-dimensional format that a book represents.
Well, I have to tell you, I love that it's seek, seed, scale. It's three key points. And I don't know. Have you ever heard of the power of threes? Have you ever
What about
heard
the
of
rule of three? Is that the
the
same?
rule of threes? That's exactly right.
Yes, one of my first coaches taught me the rule of
Ah,
three.
all right. And I just love that, right? I used to, when I was kind of more in the trenches teaching leadership development early on, when you talk about how to communicate effectively with people and the rule of threes, I call it the power of threes, how effective that is and how it almost instantaneously sticks in your mind. And the neuropsychology of it all, right? Like the brain can contain those three main ideas more than it'll ever contain four, five, six.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think for this kind of work, it's really critical because as I look particularly at founders at startups and say, like, why are some successful? And focus is so critical,
Absolutely.
because if you're in a big company, I mean, and I know this because that's where I spent a lot of my career. You can run out of budget, but you're still going to get paid.
Ha.
Right? Your team is still going to get paid. Things will still keep sort of motoring along. You're a founder at a startup. You run out of cash. Your investors are, they're going to say like bye bye if they don't think you've sent them the money responsibly. So focus is, time is not your friend. So you have to be very prudent with your resources, money, people, and time. And so, yes, I think rule of three is very relevant to people doing this kind of work.
I love it. And just as a top of mind question here, before we kind of get into all of those threes and some of the nuances of them potentially, you've mentioned this before. You dabbled in it throughout our conversation about the difference between startups and large corporations. Is it an obvious to say that innovation is best born and bred in just startups because they're basically that, or is there obviously distinct differences, but kind of pros and cons from large corporate organizations using the word innovation and startups? I mean, who learns the most?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've done a keynote. I've done a talk that people really get a kick out of called "What Startups and Big Companies Can Learn from Each Other." And
Huh,
startups like to think about big companies as dinosaurs, right? They're God, and of course I'm generalizing, right?
sure.
But what big companies have going for them is they do have resources, they have tremendous talent, they have deep knowledge of their sectors, and they know how to scale. They know how to scale with quality and control. Those are all real assets because startups really struggle to scale, and they're very shorthanded on talent oftentimes. Startups, on the other hand, are incredibly fast and scrappy. The startups that make it don't suffer from this idea of not being connected to their customers, because if they're a good startup, the founder is out speaking directly to customers all the time. That's how they get
Hmm.
their insights, because they don't have the budget to hire market research companies to produce big fancy PowerPoint reports. So there's a lot of back and forth, and I think if they each look at each other and learn from them, they can do well. I think you see a lot of startup and corporate partnering today because some companies are finding that, yeah, let me seed ideas on through a startup because they're not burdened with any legacy baggage,
True.
um, and work with them in such a way that I can bring the scale, right? So I think there are models that work. I get a little skeptical when companies say, well, our people can't innovate, so we're going to go pitch a tent in Silicon Valley. 'Cause I think you do your people a huge disservice. And I think if you go down that route, you run the risk of spawning concepts that are divorced from the business model and maybe the reality of customer needs. So you may end up with a lot of cool stuff that doesn't have commercial potential. I've been, my teams, my corporate teams made significant effort to leverage internal talent and also bring in talent from the outside because I think diversity is so critical and you need both. So you need people who know how to operate the machine inside, have the sector expertise, know how to influence inside that culture, know how things get done. But you know what? You don't want to run the risk of being internally focused and just worrying about how do I kind of like run the internal gauntlet. You need outside talent. But employees in these big companies need permission to innovate. They need that sponsorship.
Yeah.
They may probably need to reskill, but do not turn your backs on your employees en masse. I think that's a leadership failing.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I love as I'm sitting here, just I'm seeing the word change maker, and I'm envisioning people listening to this podcast that are in those situations right now, and they just want to reach up on that bookshelf and pull it down and go, I'm a change maker. I am a change maker, and we're going to do something about it, and to be able to really kind of set things in motion. It's just fascinating. So seek, seed, scale. I think you have probably, even in the last few minutes, have dabbled with talking about the seeking, the seeding, and the scaling. But to spend a few moments with us without giving away the book, obviously. But like what is the key? What do you mean by seek? What is you're sitting there and you're like, we're going to change the future. We're going to do things different. We are going to make ourselves uncomfortable. What is this seek mode that you suggest?
Mhm. Seeking starts with, what does it mean to discover insights into these, real problems that real people have? It's being a little bit of an explorer, almost, putting on the hat of an anthropologist to understand where are the problems that I want to, that I can solve or am excited to solve for the people who my brand wants to serve. And so it really seeking is about establishing how do you find and define what concepts you want to go after, and sort of setting the tone and sort of what are the basic skills and attributes of the mindset that you're going to need to um, make progress. So it's about it's about discovery. It's about what's your purpose? Do you have a clear purpose? Which I think is very important to innovation. And it's about how do you understand what it really means to be resourceful? You're not going to have a lot of resources at the beginning.
Sure. And so, does it mean, Amy, that you're really finding when you're talking about what is the need and what are you missing? So you're saying to me right off the bat, though, that an innovation person isn't a fortune teller. They don't have a crystal ball. Like they don't give the CIOs crystal balls to go for it and just predict the future. Is it
No,
almost the exact opposite in a way? You were starting.
you're
Yep.
you're listening. You're listening to customers, and not just with your ears, but also with your eyes. Because a lot of
Uh,
times, Steve Jobs was very famous for saying, it's attributed to him a quote that, people don't know what they need. And I think people may not be able to articulate in words what they need. And oftentimes, even if we can tell somebody what we need, we articulate that need against what we already know. So none of us could have
yes,
imagined, that we couldn't live without our phone or mobile phones, right? Probably even 10 years ago, right? And
that's true.
now they're like chained to our bodies. So observing behavior is an important part of listening. So I think it's that. I think it's also being able to look at the trends and understand where things are going. And there's this whole concept of learning how to see the weak signals in the trends. So I think it's really great innovation muscle that anyone can develop or definitely affiliate with people would have it is the ability to look at the trends and spot the weak signals because those are the ones that give you a jump in terms of starting on something that may be further down the road. So you have more time. Now, of course, that means more people around you are going to think you're crazy and that you're not onto something.
So true.
But but I think it's a combination of trends and active listening.
I love that. And then you're using the Jobs example. I love. Have you heard the Henry Ford example about
Yes.
about the horses? He
Yes.
was like, if you want to get from New York City to Philadelphia quicker, what are you looking for? And if they didn't know the context of cars, they would have just said, we just need faster horses because that's all they knew as a customer, right? Just faster horses. And he had to really almost educate them into this new technology and all of those kind of things. And
Right.
it was with the ears and the eyes.
Right. And the other thing that connects to is why understanding purpose is so important and defining what's the problem that you're trying to solve. So you're right. If the problem you're trying to solve is, it's a bigger is it transportation? Is it connecting people to the people they care about more quickly? Is it make the buggy go faster? So if
Right.
Ford said, "I want the buggy to go faster," you would have been limited to the buggy. But if you
Yep.
said, I want to transport people in, 90% faster, that almost forces you to, well, it can't be a buggy,
Right.
right?
So true. That's right.
And if they had said, well, we want to connect people physically, we want to get people close to important people in their lives, maybe they would have, created mobile phones or spaceships. I don't know. It's like, so where you frame, what's the problem we're trying to solve and what is our purpose sets the foundation for your vision and how far you really want to push.
So is that what you're getting after with your second part? Is that what seeding is?
Seeding is really once you've got, you begin to have rough notions of insights and you're starting to think about solutions, it really gets into kind of the, roll up your sleeves work of prototyping and testing and learning, which I see as very collaborative. Again,
Hmm.
bringing the customer insight and sometimes the customers right into the prototyping process, and then very
Ah, wow.
quickly starting to imagine, what would the business model? Let me start to at least hypothesize what my business model would look like. And I think where a lot of innovators, particularly corporate innovators, get into trouble early on is they take or they're pushed to take by their finance organizations, um, they'll evaluate a concept through the lens of products that already exist, right? Or the current business model, and with metrics that may be fantastic for monitoring a scale business, but have nothing to do with innovation. So I'll give you an
Ah,
example. In my chief innovation officer role, colleagues at one point were not interested in any idea that couldn't deliver at least $50 million to the P&L. Now, we were a $5 billion bottom line. So you'd say, well, 50, "No, that's not really that much, just 1%." But if you're really doing something innovative, that's, new, right? New to the market or new to your sector, how can you possibly predict that it's going to be worth $50 million? It's not just the revenue and the pickup, your expense base could be different. The way you can't predict how customers are going to behave. So having the right metrics and early on saying not oh let me do let me build an Excel spreadsheet, carried out 4 decimal places of what the net present value is going to be and what my cash flows are going to look like in 5 years. No, don't do that. You start by building a business model where you say, well, what would I have to believe in terms of, you do a market sizing. How big do I think the addressable market is? How many people are in that market? And what if I got 1% market share, which 1% is not easy to get, but let's start there.
sure.
And then what would I have to believe about revenues and expenses and any capital investments I'd have to make? And how do I feel about that? So, and that's really how we started our early concept evaluations in my first chief innovation officer role, as opposed to, and then as opposed to trying to build a full P&L, which is just ridiculous. It may make people feel good, but it's false comfort. Then you start to experiment, and as you get more and more precise and you get learnings from your experiment, you can start to sharpen your numbers and put some real stakes in the ground. So that's a lot of what seeding is about. It's prototyping and experimenting to get to a viable concept, one that you can actually build, and then viable from a business model standpoint as well, with enough evidence from your testing that you say, okay, this looks like it could work.
Yeah, it's interesting. When a lot of people probably conceptualize the idea of an innovation shop or a skunk works going and all of those kind of things, they think probably a bunch of mad scientists in there and, these big deep thinkers that are just conceptualizing what the future is and just everybody running around hair on fire in a way about doing all this stuff. But what you just described is a pretty disciplined process.
Yeah, it's very disciplined. We didn't have a foosball table, by the way.
Oh,
No,
lovely.
no foosball
Yes.
table and no free food,
Yeah.
except maybe
Sleeping pod.
an occasional pizza lunch. But it was incredibly disciplined, and I think I credit a lot of the structure we created to my own background in direct marketing, because I started my corporate career at American Express and doing direct mail. We're like getting the mail out the door. And that's a function and a channel that is very data driven, very disciplined, very, very much oriented around test and learn. In direct mail, testing and experimentation is an essential part of what makes it work. So there's
Sure.
no argument about testing. People know, like, you don't get paid in direct marketing unless you're doing tests. So I sort of took those disciplines over to this work and said, well, we have to do all these things, but we have to do like measurement on the terms that are appropriate for the problem we're trying to solve. Not just, you can't cut and paste processes and rules and procedures from a scale business onto an innovation. But learn from those things and adapt them, to make them fit for purpose.
Makes complete sense. You bet. And then you sit there, you have the widget ready to go. How the heck do you put it to scale?
Right. So, and this is where I think founders at startups really struggle is how do I scale? Because big companies are built for industrial strength. So they know how to do things at scale. I mean, at Citi in the card business at peak, we had almost 100 million accounts. So
Wow.
business it was probably one of the world's largest consumer franchises. So we knew scale. But I think it requires leaders to step back and really think differently about their talent, their structure, their processes, because you do operate a little informally and a little seat of the pants, even in a large company. When you're in an early stage concept, where you're trying to prove an early stage concept, the downside risk is that you just spent money on something that ends up getting, killed, right? It didn't
Yep.
work. But that's a very controllable risk. You just budget for, right? When
Sure.
scaling is a whole different matter, because once you start to serve large numbers of customers in the outside world, you've got to have a predictable quality product virtually all the time,
You
right?
bet.
If
You
you're
bet.
regulated, you have to answer to your regulators. So you have to really, it starts with then going back to the beginning and saying, okay, what, what team, what structure, what skill set, what processes, what metrics, what do I need so that I can now achieve an upward glide path?
Absolutely. It's so interesting. And I think in my experience in observations, it's so funny. It seems like disproportionately many get to the point to start scale and then it just flounders. It just is completely paralyzing to them. They have not figured out the secret sauce on how to properly scale. And many things just kind of die on the vine. It's amazing, even if it's a great concept.
Yeah, and it's not just a matter of money. I mean, I think what happens,
Yes.
once a concept is proven in early trials, then you get that pot of money to scale, and the pressure is really intense and really changes. Whether you're in a startup or you're in the corporate world. If you're in a startup, you have your investors who are now on your board, and they they're very serious. They want results, and you promised, this was your forecast, this was going to deliver. You deliver it, or you're out, right? In a corporation, once you start to build revenues and results into the annual plan, you're also on the hook, and
You
you've
bet.
gotten resources because somebody else hasn't, right? And
You
so
bet.
you have to, so there's an immense amount of pressure. And I think that's why the leadership requirements become very heightened. And it's where you need that balance of mature leadership, really know what it takes to operate a scale business, but you need the people who understand, how do I walk the path to get up there? because not every leader running a scale business built that business.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think this is the talent transition point, right? Like this is where you definitely have got to have both sets of those type of human beings when you begin to scale.
You need the
Because
builders. You need builders and you
yeah,
need
perfect
operators.
word. Yes,
And you need visionaries, because you know what? It's not going to the need to innovate is not going to change. And that's where the book ends, is where anticipating and adapting, that you can have a raging success and then you fall victim to your success, right?
ha,
Really proud of
yes.
what you've accomplished, and you know what? You can't rest on your laurels.
Rest on the
So you
laurels. That's
need
exactly
that
right.
vision, you need the building, and you need the operating to work together.
I love it, Amy. This has been so educational for me, and I think all of our tribe members listening. And I think there's a change maker in almost all of us for sure. And this hopefully will give us that guidance and that inspiration to truly. I almost don't want to use the word innovation anymore because I just love change maker. I think that's the exact point, and to anticipate and to adapt what the next thing around the corner is going to be is just fun to even think about. So I'd love to offer you your last thoughts for our listening audience about what does the future hold? What do you need to be? What is the inspiration out there to really anticipate the next thing and be that adaptive type person?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the future definitely holds a lot of change, I think, as we've all seen this year, and I think a lot more to come. If you're listening to this program, I'm guessing you've got the interest and hopefully great passion for this topic. And I think know that there are a lot of people out there like you who want to do this work. It's really hard work. It's really rewarding. None of us has all the answers. I think the last piece of advice I'd give you is continue to expand your network and build relationships with and learn from other people engaged in making change and in innovating, because that's how that's really a key to moving forward, because the work's never done and we are all going to be learning continuously, having to unlearn and relearn in a world that's changing very rapidly.
Yeah, you bet. Well, Amy, you certainly have hit the point of the iron sharpens iron movement, that it is discovering and finding others to help us all become better every single day. And you have done that today. So, Amy, thanks again for this fascinating conversation. And we all look forward to digging deeper into your book, The Change Maker's Playbook.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really been fun to talk with you, Jim.
Awesome. It's been a great time. Thanks. Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Amy about what it takes to truly understand the approach to innovation and the process to become successful was a real eye-opener. I hope you liked it as much as I did. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build the tribe. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.